All right, everybody, we're going to get started. Thank you for joining. My name is Liz Pena. I'm a marketing specialist here at Verity IT. Today's webinar will be covering the email threat landscape in today's society and how to best mitigate these threats to protect your business. We're joined today by Melanie No to discuss the impact of email threats further. Melanie has been in the software and technology field for over 12 years. Cybersecurity is now her focus, and she continues to educate others in the ever-evolving world of technology. Thanks for joining us, Melanie.
Oh, thanks, Liz. I appreciate that. I appreciate the time. Hello, everyone. So as Liz said, we're gonna talk about a few items today, specifically on the email threats that are out there today. And some of the topics that we'll cover are going to be things like business email compromise, account takeover attacks, spear phishing, unknown malware and what that really means, and some of the mitigation strategies and ways that we can proactively combat some of these threats and protect our environments. So let's talk about some of the threats that are out there and, really look at some of the details and numbers behind that. So in a study done by Verizon in 2019, they detected that there was 94% of the malware incidents actually came from email. It's a very common simple way for the bad guys to get through to your environment, right? So think about emails and attachments, and we communicate using email every day. It's just a very simplistic way for them to infiltrate your network and easily access data that they shouldn't be. So that 94% is a really, really, really high number, obviously, and we want to talk about how we can protect you all from that. So, I know many organizations are using Office 365, and Microsoft for email, which is great, right? So Office 365 does have anti-malware protection built in. However, the key thing that we should really recognize is that it's only designed to catch all known malware. So as you can see on the chart here, we're looking at a chart. 5% of malware that comes in is known, and there's about 95% that is unknown, right? Which is tricky, right? So how do we protect it? We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But what this really means is that the Office 365 basic security only protects that small percentage of malware that's coming through your email. So the best analogy that we can really think of or visualize is if you did have a smoke detector in your home and it was only going to detect 5% of fires. Is that really good enough? Right? Probably not. You probably would want to get another smoke detector or another layer of protection to make sure you're at least as close to 100% as possible, right? So we'll talk about some of that. We'll talk about, how email is the number one source of attacks, and also, how that comes through, whether it be a phishing or spam email, and how we can protect that. So let's take a look a little further. So here's some numbers behind it, right? So in 2019, there was a study. Cloud App Security was actually noted to cover over 12 million high-risk attack email threats that came in. So it detected over that 12 million number of potential threats. These threats were actually missed by Office 365 security, that built-in security we talked about, that 5%. And the cloud app security, that additional layer, was able to detect an additional 12 plus million. So that kind of gives you a really broad view of how you need to have that extra layer on top of what Microsoft already has built in. There's also some other numbers. There was over 11 million phishing attacks that were detected or prevented from coming through via email. Also, about 385 plus business email compromise attacks, which we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. And then almost a million in malware attacks that were sent via email as well. And usually those can be, typically sent in the form of an attachment or something like that, right? So we want to talk about that too. Let's first talk about some of the words that we're expressing today and some of the terms, right? So if you take a look here, business email compromise, what does that mean, right? There's a couple of ways that that can be actually executed by by a a threat attacker. So for example, spear phishing, this is going to be a social engineering attack conducted via email, right? So typically spear phishing is going to be a targeted attack, maybe for a specific person. Maybe they're an executive or someone in higher rank, and they're going to send that person an email to maliciously infiltrate their environment. CEO fraud, again, very specific, a phishing attack that actually impersonates the CEO. So they actually would spoof someone's email, which basically means mimicking that email to make it look like it's coming from the CEO, and asking for some type of action, right, from maybe a lower level employee, right? So that's a very, very common one that we see often. Whaling is a phishing attack, again, targeting a corporate executive, maybe someone that is higher in the ranks, that might work in line with CEO as well. So that's another one. And then wire transfer fraud. This is also extremely common. A phishing attack that really persuades someone to transfer money to their account. A lot of the times we see this in conjunction with the CEO fraud. So, we might see someone send the CEO or spoof or pretend to send an email that looks like it's coming from the CEO, asking someone in accounting to transfer money, whether it be for payroll or whatever it is. And it looks legitimate to them, right? So this is a very common combination that we do see in the market today. Here's a little bit more detail. So the business email compromise attacks, in 2019 was also kind of analyzed a little bit. Well, I should say from 2014 to 2019 was analyzed by the FBI. So we can see here they did this study to kind of get a feel for how many business email compromise attacks were focused, and happened in this time frame. So what they uncovered is that they were saying they received complaints totaling 2.1 billion in actual total losses because of business email compromise scams or targeting Office 365 and Google G Suite as well. So this is dollars and cents put to it. Now we're not looking at percentages now we're actually looking at dollars. And I hate to say this, but that number is probably double, quite honestly, because there are a lot of these that do happen that aren't reported and complaints aren't issued. So keep that in mind. The 2.1 billion is astronomical, but my gut feeling is that it's probably much higher than that. So all right, so let's take a look. How does this happen, right? And how can we prevent it? And what are things that we should be doing to make sure we're doing the best to protect our organizations, right? So let's take a look at this. This is credential phishing. So what we do is we use computer vision, looking at the web page's logo, login form, and compare those with the URL. So for example, when you look at this page, it looks like it's coming from Microsoft, right? You could see on the the logo, everything looks legitimate. But if you look at the URL at the top, it is not coming from Microsoft. So this is a fake page. This is another example of how we can detect latest email threats by using, AI or artificial intelligence. And how that works is the URL could either be safe or unrated. So the web reputation maybe won't be detected if it's a phishing or a phishing attack or something of that nature, right? So these can slip through the cracks if you don't have an extra layer of security on top of what's built into Office 365, right? So it is very, very sneaky. This is a common one too. So keep that in mind, right? When you're clicking on a link or something of that nature, look at that URL that's at the top, right? You could see it looks nothing to be related to Microsoft, right? Everything else looks the same, but not that URL. So that's a sneaky way that a lot of these attacks are happening. So let's take a look at what that actually would entail, right? What would happen? This is an example of an email account takeover, right? So let's say, you get an email and it says, hey, please log into your Office 365 account. You need to update your password, right? Well, what's the first thing it's going to do? It's going to bring you to a page that looks identical to your login page, which we see. It has, the same identical logo. It has your email address populated, which will look the same as if you went to your office.com page. And it asks you to enter that password. So now what happens? You enter the password. unknowingly to you. Now that person, whoever retrieved those credentials on the other side, on the bad side, they're able to steal that data that may be within your email itself. Um, Even more scary, they're going to be able to access services that are related to your office.com account. So think about like your SharePoint, for example. Do you store a lot of documents there that may be, for your eyes only or for the organization's eyes only? They're going to be able to access your OneNote, which you might put, critical notes or information in there. And then even things like Teams, right? That's important. I know that's a common way we've all been communicating for months and months and months now. And we also store a lot of data in there as well, files and things like that. So, just something to keep in mind is why this is extremely critical. And then the last thing is once they're inside of your email account, they could actually go ahead and send phishing emails internally, right? So now they're going to be sending emails to maybe others within your organization. Obviously, it looks as though it's coming from you. And people are going to have that trust, right? They're going to say, oh, it's coming from Joe or it's coming from, Anne. And they're going to open that email and they're going to go ahead and maybe click on something that they shouldn't. So this is, critical to protecting the environment, making sure that we're always on point with our security. So what's the story here, right? So it only takes one, right? Maybe there was a spear phishing attack toward one person within the organization. Well, that's really all it takes, because as you can see, once they have your credentials, or they have access to your environment, a lot of damage can be done just from that one user. So, that being said, so, we talked a little bit about some numbers associated with security and everything from the FBI to others. We have done some other studies here. This is actually a publicized study here that the security breaches in the last 5 years have increased 67%. Um, and that's astronomical. I think there's many reasons for that. But one of them is just because people, are becoming more savvy with how to do email takeovers, right? Or maybe how to execute malware within an organization. It's just become um, easier for these people to be able to do it. And they're also targeting specific organizations that might not have, the best security layers in place, right? So that's why we're kind of talking here today. Um, so how do we protect ourselves from this, right? There's a couple of aspects to it. There's a little bit of human nature to it, but there's also technical features to it as well, right? So even though the bad guys are swiftly changing their tactics, there are ways to actually mitigate and prevent such attacks. Some of the security solutions out there today are specifically designed to outsmart. And there's a couple of examples of how they do that. And this is probably the most technical information that we'll share today, but I think it's just important to kind of understand the inner workings of how a cybersecurity solution works, and how it does protect, right? So machine learning is one example. You'd want to make sure that your security layers do have a machine learning aspect to it, because what this does is it improves the email delivery by finding that unknown malware that we talked about, right? So it kind of goes through using algorithms and all kinds of technologies that allow it to detect if something's out of place or something is out of the norm, right? Machine learning does that over time. It kind of basically learns, right, how the machine or the email environment operates. And if something seems out of skew or off just slightly, that's when a red flag comes up, right? So using that extra layer of security, machine learning is key. Then we also look at document exploitation detection, right? Now what this does is it actually scans files for potential exploits within Office applications, right? So whether it be, you're sending a Word document internally or externally, you're sharing information via files, whatever it is, maybe a PowerPoint presentation, for example, it actually would scan those files for any potential exploits. So that's another key feature. And then also sandbox analysis. So this actually pre-filters email to analyze any potential malicious content, right? So it does a kind of a brief scan before it actually arrives to your inbox. And this really gives the security layer of preventing it from even getting into your hands, right? So that's important as well, because, we can make sure that we're doing all our due diligence and not clicking on things. But if we can prevent it from even getting to our inbox, that's even better. So cloud app security. So this is something I want to talk about too, because this is a really important piece to protecting email and protecting the organization. What this is, it's an actual API integrated threat protection for Office 365 and file sharing. And the API basically means that it's how the software talks to each other, right? So how the security layer actually integrates right into your Office 365 account and does some of those machine learning and sandboxing items that we talked about, right? So what this is, it's a direct cloud-to-cloud integration using those APIs that I talked about. And it finds zero-day and hidden threats. So basically what it's doing is it's scanning all of the emails that come in, right? It's also protecting your other Office files like Exchange, right? Well, that's your email, but it's also talking about your OneDrive, SharePoint, Teams. Even more crucially, if you are using a file sharing application like Box or Dropbox, which is outside of the Microsoft realm, that's okay. We also can cover that too, right? So if that's how you commonly share files, within the organization or outside of the organization, this would be able to protect that as well, right? Um, and then also, like we talked about before, this is that security layer that I talked about that covered or that blocked over 12 million high risk threats that were missed by Office 365. So, you think about how often you're using these applications every day. That number makes a lot of sense, right? We rely on our email in our file sharing applications, probably numerous times a day, and hundreds of times per week, right? So this is why it's crucial to have those layers. A little bit more of kind of technology talk for a second. There's another feature that I think is really neat that I want to talk about, and that's writing style DNA. We talked about machine learning already, which is really kind of learning the behaviors of how day-to-day business is done within the environment, and kind of finding those red flags. But there's another piece to it, and I don't know, this one it kind of excites me a little bit. So the writing style DNA is really um, what we look at to analyze how someone writes an email. All right. So what does that mean? It's kind of weird. Doesn't mean we're looking at all your emails. It does not mean that at all. But what it means is that the technology is actually like that AI or artificial intelligence. It's running those algorithms to understand how someone writes. So let's take a look at this. So everyone writes in a unique style. And, if you viewed across hundreds of emails, you would see maybe even yourself personally might have a common way of communicating with an email, right? Maybe you have short sentences and small paragraphs. Maybe you have a lot of bullets or numbered items in your emails. Maybe there's certain words that you reuse or commonly use, right? So these are part of the writing style DNA. And what it does is it actually detects forgeries that might be potentially happening. So think of this. Let's use that CEO fraud item that I talked about before, right? And someone somehow gets the CEO's credentials, they log in, and they try to send an email that looks like it's coming from the CEO. Now, the CEO typically writes very short paragraphs. Maybe he uses similar words or iconic words, or maybe he has a certain signature at the bottom that he uses. Sign offs. Maybe he says respectfully or sincerely. Maybe there's a certain word that he uses. What it'll do if someone tries to send an email that looks like it's coming from the CEO and it's not, it'll actually send a quick note to the actual CEO and say, did you write this email? Because it looks a little different than how you normally write, right? It's an automatic machine learning aspect. And it actually will send that. And the CEO can go, oh, yep, I wrote that. I approve this. It's okay to send. Or he might look at it and go, oh gosh, no, I did not write that, right? So this is another example of just that extra layer of protection to make sure that internal emails or external emails evenly are legitimate and safe. All right. Another aspect might be to do security awareness training, right? A lot of a lot of organizations out there are doing this today. I think it is extremely helpful to kind of help simulate what might be a phishing attack. So for example, you could set up a training campaign to educate your employees internally. And of course this isn't an actual attack, this is a simulated attack, but what it does is it actually helps train people, right, to be more aware and more conscious of what they're clicking on, what they're looking at, what their attachments they might be opening and things like that. So I like these campaigns because they're really customizable. You can create a Outlook, like one that we looked at earlier. Maybe it says, "Hey, your Outlook emails are on hold. Please log in here to change your password." Right? That's that tricky one we talked about earlier. Maybe it's something about, "Hey, you received a Uber Eats gift card from your employer," right? Something like that. These obviously aren't legitimate, but it is a way to take that extra step back and think right before you click, and make sure that you're kind of on point. So I think this is very crucial to any organization to make sure that they're doing on a regular basis. And what does that simulated phishing do, right? So yes, you're training people to be more aware, but you also can kind of monitor the results in real time, right? Are your employees improving with making sure they're being more, socially responsible with what they're doing in the organization with in regards to email, right? So it could kind of give you, maybe there was 36 people that opened the email, but only 6 of them actually clicked on the link in the email, right? And things like that. So you can kind of see that information and decide, well, are they improving or do they need extra help? Is there something else within the organization we should be doing to make sure that our people are aware of any email threats and potential threats? Let's see. I think that's all I have today. I think we did pretty good on time, Liz.
You did
Um,
awesome. Thank
all
you
right.
so much. And thank you everybody for joining us. We did have a few questions roll in that we'd like to address if you don't mind, Melanie.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. The first one is, what should you do if you suspect your email account has been compromised?
Yes. So that's a good question. So there are a couple things that you should do. One would be initially change your password, right? I know a lot of organizations have kind of time frames that when they suggest you should change it. But if you do feel that there has been some type of compromise, immediately change your password. Another thing that you could do to protect even proactively would be to enable two-factor authentication and even change your security questions, right? So those are proactive things that you can do. But I would say initially, change your password right away. One key thing I want to mention I'll look for is if you feel you've been compromised, not only changing the password, but also check your settings. Because a lot of the times what they'll do is if there is a legitimate attack, they'll actually put on auto forward within your email. So any email that you're getting would actually be redirected to another user, right? Maybe in this sense, the bad guy. So definitely, do those two things, change your password and check your settings would be my best recommendations.
Awesome. And then the second one we had come in is, if you send a hacker money, is there any way to get it back?
Mm. That's a tough one. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but sadly, no. So if you are a victim of ransomware attack and they demand payment to unlock your files, you will not be able to retrieve that money back. They're really smart and typically request payments in the form of an untraceable method, like maybe cryptocurrency, for example, like a Bitcoin or something like that. The thing with those is that they can actually cash those funds out anonymously, and this, there's no way to pull that money back once it's sent. So sad, but the brutal truth, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you so much. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have today for questions. If you did submit a question and we didn't get to it, I will send you an email after the presentation is completed. As promised, we will be running the list of attendees and drawing a name for the winner of the $100 gift card. We will notify you today if you're the winner, and we will get your gift card in the mail as soon as possible. Again, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us, and thank you, Melanie, again for presenting. You did an amazing job. We'd
Thanks.
love if you would join our next webinar, Co-Managed IT, Knowing When Your Business Needs Help, on June 30th. I will be reaching out with an invite and a list of our other upcoming webinars as well. Thank you, everybody, for joining again, and we hope you have a productive day.
All right. Bye, everyone.